So my favorite lesson in History 9 this year was the transatlantic slave trade and the abolitionists. I like this lesson because it was the most entertaining and the most fun to listen to and research about, since we got to know how people were treated, how the slave people were captured. They were like taken in from like the white people ship. They would like come to like the countries in Africa where they would like trick the Africans into like boarding the ship.
My favorite lesson in History 9 is the Protestant Reformation. I enjoyed learning about the different reformers. It was fascinating to learn that even though the reformers were fighting for the same goal against the Roman Catholic Church, they all had different religious beliefs and interpreted the Bible differently. But in the end, they came together and fought for freedom and invited the people not to blindly trust the Roman Catholic Church. I enjoyed it most because it was almost like a movie. There was an exposition of the people being started by the Roman Catholic Church, and Martin Luther was like the hero, the protagonist, and he gathered all his other superhero friends to save the day and free the people from the bloody hands of the Catholic Church.
Firstly, my favorite lesson in History 9 was regarding Age of Enlightenment. I personally advocate for liberalism and a democratic system of government as the most justified and productive ideology in the modern world. Age of Enlightenment established a foundation for those ideas to take root. It was generally helpful for me to understand the history and the background of the inception of the liberal democratic ideas.
My favorite lesson in History 9 was the Renaissance unit. Personally, I loved seeing the different kinds of art along with the worksheets where we analyzed the paintings. And furthermore, learning the motivations of the Renaissance gave me insight into why the painters at the time illustrated in a certain way. Simply hearing about the hard work being put into the architecture, such as stained glass, wood carvings, and extravagant churches, made the history lessons fun to learn about. Machiavelli's The Prince was incredibly interesting philosophy. Although writing the book review was challenging, it helped me fully understand the principles of the prince and some of the values held during that time. I fully believe that the creation of humanism in Italy was one of the moments in history that changed the world forever. So learning about it was really fun and interesting. And the transition from the Renaissance to the Reformation really showed how the church and state would separate in modern day.
The age of exploration, and more specifically the Atlantic slave trade and the lessons about slavery in general. I like this lesson because we're both able to learn the history behind slavery and also how it is in the modern day.
I like the lesson of the age of exploration. I liked it because it taught me the foundation of the modern day countries. Through the age of exploration, many continents were introduced to Europe, and sea trades were encouraged, and many sea routes were found. This gave the foundation of many modern countries, such as USA, and many modern kind of technologies.
The Renaissance, or rather, the entire Renaissance unit, as it was an easy unit to start with and to learn. I think it was very entertaining with activities such as the murder mystery of Lorenzo Medici.
The week that we had allocated to discuss slavery, regarding both modern day slavery and slavery before. Learning especially about the Atlantic slave trade and the Middle Passage in detail was really enlightening. And I think it's really important for students, not just American students, to be aware of the horrors that existed in slavery in our own past in order to prevent it in the future. Since we do know that history repeats itself, it's really important that we always stay aware of our own past. And I think this specific week of lessons really helped to emphasize that. And I really appreciated the conversation and discussion we had with Mr. Stanley as well. I think it really reinforced the idea of slavery being negative, and it really opened the eyes of many students. And the activity that we did adjacent to this lesson about having a video presentation, I found it very effective and very complimenting of the lessons that we had already had. Overall, that week that talked about slavery, I think it was my favorite week, and it was the most well done with your lessons, Mr. Stanley's discussion, and the adjacent activity. And it all fit together really well to teach us the main message.
My favorite lesson from History 9 was the Renaissance, more specifically Renaissance art. I have a hobby level interest in art, so learning about the different various amounts of beautiful paintings was extremely fun and interesting to me because it showed complex techniques and complex concepts and stories from the artists themselves.
My favorite lesson in History 9 was a lesson about Islam. I always was and is still interested in other religions, especially Islam, because Islam was often compared to Christianity. I like to study the history of Islam, especially how it started and how they were divided into two groups and they had different beliefs, the Sunni and the Shia. And I really liked it when Mrs. Gogan would invite an ex-Muslim to tell us about the things that will happen if you're in a Muslim family and the steps and rules that you will have to keep and go through if you're a Muslim.
My favorite lesson in History 9 this year was probably the lesson about the Atlantic slave trade, because I never really learned in detail about the slave trade, and it was my first time learning what actually happened and what they endured during their lives as slaves, what kind of work they did and where they came from. So this lesson was really interesting because it educated me on the things that happened in history back then, because the slave trade was a dark time in history.
The abolition letter that he made to stop, abolish slave trade, like in both America and England. So me and Navin were the ones who wrote our letter to Prime Minister William Pitt. And another activity that I really liked was the Syria trip video. So after we had the Syria trip this year, we made a video that you assigned. It was very entertaining because I got to reminisce on all the activities we did, and as well as got to use all the pictures I took and me and my group took.
My favorite activity was all the debates and class discussions we had. But I enjoyed the discussion we had when all the chairs were in like a circle formation. When we entered the room that day, I thought that the debate would be like a regular debate, but the formation of chairs, like how it was formated in a circle, it actually like really changed how the discussion was facilitated. I don't exactly remember the topic at the time, but I remember that I was able to hear everyone more audibly and see everyone's faces. It definitely felt like we were more open to talking and more open to taking answers and giving out responses.
My favorite activity in History 9 was Socratic Seminar. It was really fun to participate in the intellectual discussion in many different topics. Especially, we discussed and debated about highly controversial topics. For example, regarding the diatreme system, the Janissaries, the Ottoman Empire, we discussed about what is most beneficial for the entirety of the society, issue of slavery, and the importance of individual autonomy. It was genuinely enjoyable because we got to see other people's viewpoints and their ideas and opinions.
Philosophical chairs have always been my favorite, and hearing the class's opinion and debating on the questions proposed was always super fun and interactive. The questions were always controversial and entertaining to argue about, specifically the Janissary debate. And during the Gunpowder Empire units, the debates were the most engaging since the class debated on child soldiers and the ethicalness of the Gunpowder Empires. Additionally, I remember that one time where Mrs. Skogan let the students make their own version of the 95 theses to improve the school, and Ms. Stanley actually came to come hear the complaints of 9th grade, and it was really memorable. And another activity that I like is how Mrs. Skogan lets the class play Pictionary as a test review.
It would be the activities that require making videos, like the videos for the Syria trip and the types of modern day slavery. These types of activities were my favorite because the process itself was enjoyable, and during it, I was able to learn more about the topic. And when the final video was done, it was so accomplishing to watch it.
My favorite activity is sharing our notes on the whiteboard, because by having this activity, I could think more deeply about the concepts that we learned in class.
My favorite activity for the entire of history would be The Prince and learning about it. The Prince and the debates that followed about it were quite interesting to me, as I really liked The Prince. I enjoyed it. And every time we have a debate, it gets everyone engaged. So I would say do more.
It would definitely have to be all of our philosophical chairs. I really enjoyed having discussions and debates with classmates because I am a person who does love debate. So I would always get excited whenever a philosophical chair was announced. I like how it was organized in a way that everyone felt compelled to participate, even if they weren't typically people to speak in class. During a philosophical chair, almost everyone would speak, and I think that was really interesting to get to see other people's inputs that I don't usually get to hear about. And also many of the prompts were very interesting, even just to think about, and especially the ones that related to modern day. I found it very interesting to be able to connect the topics that we're learning in early modern history into our own modern day. I think my favorite prompt would have to be the prompt wondering if it's racist that Koreans would only prefer to marry other Koreans.
My favorite lesson from History 9 was analyzing these paintings, because it helped me become more analytical when it comes to viewing art or media in general, like films, art pieces, music, and it helped me really appreciate the art pieces and even the artists themselves for being able to portray such interesting concepts in their pieces.
My favorite activity during History 9 was the current events. I really enjoyed current events because not only we get to know events and we get an update in events, but we also hear that and learn that from our friends, and it was really something. There was like some funny stuff and it was very relaxing. And I also really liked Pictionary, especially before tests and quizzes, because Mrs. Skogan would help us review for the things, and we will play Pictionary to help us review. Since it is not too much studying and it is mostly kind of like a relaxing game, it was really fun and I think I would miss it.
Probably when we reviewed for quizzes and tests, like when we review for them by playing Pictionary, because Pictionary is like it's very fun to play because you're also playing with your friends, but at the same time we're learning and reviewing too. So that was a really fun activity.
This year was a very good year, I would say that. And I would say that another way we can make the class more informative or entertaining, I'd say, like what you're doing is right. I'd say that when you brought out like the whiteboard at the latter halves of the year to make us write down stuff that we learned in class, I think that's very good since the class will have to pay attention if they want to share their ideas. I also think that the current events really help the class because like you share a topic that you otherwise wouldn't know about, and it kind of like enlightens you. I'm just saying that your class is already interactive with all the Socratic seminars, the current events. I think overall, this year was pretty good. I really liked the lessons that we had. They were very informative and entertaining.
To make the class more interesting in the future, I feel like we could do more group presentations about controversial topics and have debates about them. And also incorporate the circle for mission chairs. I feel as though in History 9, we're being pushed out of our shells in a safe environment like a classroom. We can use this experience to nurture us with doing bigger things in the future. But overall, History 9 was one of my favorite classes. I enjoyed how Mrs. Gogan gave us opportunities to express our ideas and made this class a safe environment to practice our public speaking skills.
I think it will be wonderful if History 9 next year will have more active and exciting debate sessions. This activity will allow students to think more independently and understand the topic more profoundly and deeply. They will be able to construct their idea and a worldview of their own.
And if I had to add something to history class to make it more interesting, I would add more games like Kahoot or Quiz Live or Blooket to get people who don't really participate to still learn the material. And I think that History 9 is already pretty much perfect, so I don't have much to say about improvements because I already think it's the right balance of engagement and actual learning.
I believe adding more artistic activities like comics and posters and even drawings and paintings relating to any historical topic will make the class more interesting and fun. Will allow students to show off their artistic skills while also showing their knowledge on the topic.
There could be more activities such as whiteboard, Kahoot, team quizzes, etc. These activities will make the class more interesting and interactive and help students to kind of review the material that we learned in class.
And to finish off, I think history is the most balanced class that we have, so there's not much that I would say needs to be improved about it. I think the balance between the lessons, discussions, and activities are always really efficient and they work well, and having discussion questions on the whiteboard in between really helps people to pay attention during lessons. And so I don't think there's much to improve. I think the only thing would be to have a bit more guided help when we're doing primary source readings, just because it's hard for some people to comprehend text written in the old language. I think it's great to be exposed to it, but seeing as people really struggled with the speeches in the BJU curriculum, I think being taught how to accurately and appropriately read and evaluate primary sources might really help for us in the future. Otherwise, History 9 was such a great class.
And something I'd like to add that is fun and interactive to History 9 is nothing. I thought History 9 was a very fun class already, and I've learned a lot from History 9 because of the interactive discussions we had, the debates, and the implement of whiteboards where the class got to answer, and the student-led lessons where students taught the fellow classmates that was recently implemented. I thought the student did a great job in interacting with each student and explaining in a way that is very student-friendly and was very approachable in teaching the class more if needed to.
And the things that I think should be added in History 9 is, I think there's none. I personally think that the class doesn't need a change, and I don't think that anything needs to be added. The History 9 class itself was very interesting and very fun. The History 9 class and teacher would be the best history class I ever had and would have.
There isn't really much, but I would say maybe playing different kinds of games reviews like Kahoots, but then we can give extra credit to the winners of those games because it will like compel us to be more competitive, and we can also have fun at the same time. Also, it will also cause us to actually study more before class because we want that extra credit.
Thank you, Ms. Gogan.
I'd like to thank Mrs. Gogan for teaching and guiding the class and taking care of us. We're with you, and we hope the best for you and your future ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gogan, for the wonderful year we had together in History 9. Thank you, and I hope we can see each other soon.
Hello, Ms. Gogan.
Thank you.